Hello, my name is Julia. I am a certified Montessori teacher, as well as a mum of a 15-month-old named Isaac and a stepmom to an 8-year-old named Asher. Today's video is going to be kind of a part 2 from my earlier video that I did busting 5 Montessori myths. And today I'm going to be busting 5 more myths about Montessori, specifically surrounding school versus home life. If this type of content is up your alley, I would love for you to subscribe, as well as click that notification bell so you can be alerted anytime I post a new video. I also have an Instagram account, which I will put in the description below, so feel free to go follow me on there. I'm discovering it is a very great place to post kind of smaller DIY ideas and budget-friendly options that don't necessarily have space or time to fit in a video. The very first myth I'd like to debunk is, I think, a big one, and I think a huge question in general that parents tend to have, which is that there's no point in doing Montessori at home if my child doesn't attend a Montessori preschool or Montessori school. And in fact, this is most untrue. When people traditionally think of a Montessori school or Montessori style education, the first 2 things that come to mind tend to be the very specifically laid out materials that are used in those orderly presentations and the way that things are taught to a child. So for example, the way that a math concept such as addition with larger numbers may be taught versus what most people tend to use and how most people tend to learn in a traditional school.
2 times 4 is? 8.
A Montessori style education is far more than the academic subjects that are taught. And a massive part of any child's journey in a Montessori class is learning how to become a responsible citizen, a collaborative and positive community member, and how to improve their own independence by practicing with various tools and feeling safe to make mistakes. Those types of things can be mimicked at home and can be taught at home no matter what school your child goes to. Things like grace and courtesy, how to maneuver oneself around other people, say strangers or new friends, in a way that leaves people feeling better about themselves or that shows an appreciation for any effort that is done. Things like conflict resolution and peace education are entirely doable at home as well. The materials do make up a significant portion because it is what is visibly seen in a classroom. But remember what else you may see in a classroom that you can for sure mimic at home without having to spend all of the money or time making or purchasing materials. Things like how clean the environment is, the spatial organization of subjects versus practical life, what's by the entranceway in a classroom, the space for children to put their personal things, a quiet space such as a peace corner that may be available for a single child to go if they just need a moment to themselves or a quiet moment in general. All of these parts of the physical environment can be done at home as well with very little effort on your part. You can start off with one part of your house, say the entranceway, and in a Montessori style, you can make sure that for your child to be able to independently put their shoes on, put their coat, hang up their backpack, all that stuff, is there a space that they can do that without needing to ask for your help? Then you can move on to other spaces in your house. So Montessori at home is extremely doable because the Montessori method extends far beyond the materials and the style of presenting the academic subjects. The second myth that I would like to dispel today is that in a Montessori school, students are not being graded properly because there is no standardized testing. In preschool and elementary, for sure, there is no standardized testing unless, of course, there is some sort of of ministry or government requirement. Here we have standardized testing that happens in grade 4 and grade 7. However, they have become optional, so you can opt your child out of them. And if you opt your child out of them, if they attend a Montessori school, then they won't be doing anything unless perhaps, there's some sort of spelling test done once in a while. But there are no math tests, there are no social studies tests, there's no science tests. There's not what you might think of as everyone's sitting down, it's quiet, and everyone has a certain amount of time to complete a certain amount of questions. Not for elementary and preschool. Middle school and high school, yes, partially because it is a necessity for any sort of ministry assessment, and because learning how to take a test is a very important skill. However, in Montessori philosophy, it is a skill that an older student is much more likely to not panic or stress out about learning, rather than a child who is still trying to master foundational skills to now also worry about how to complete something in order to get a good mark in a certain amount of time. And I would argue, and I have heard this from a fair few colleagues over the years, that testing does not necessarily equate to accurate knowledge retention. Some students do get very good at taking a test, but then what they are practicing in order to be able to be good at that test are perhaps strategies that are not ideal. Things such as procrastinating, jam-packing all of your learning into the wee hours of the morning. Obviously, it's not healthy for any person to practice strategies in order to complete something that are going to increase any levels of stress. And so, in fact, a child spending time and learning something in a very physical and calm manner is going to be much more effective in the long run than doing standardized testings to see generally what they might know of one small subject. And not to toot us Montessori teachers' horns or anything like that, but our style of teaching is such that we have very thorough record keeping that is consistent and also comprises of both formal and informal assessments on a daily or weekly basis for every individual kid in a class. Meaning, I would have a binder or I would have a portfolio for every single kid with tabs for every single subject. And I'm looking at their work on a daily or weekly basis. I'm having individual meetings with this kid. I am looking at their work chart and reviewing it. I'm in communication with them all the time. This is what any Montessori teacher in a classroom is trained to do. And so in a way, the standardized testing is a moot factor in a classroom because you already have such a good idea of where each child is at with each of the subjects. And so the grading of students actually is a continuous and very intensive part of any Montessori classroom. When I was teaching in middle school, we did have math tests and we did do general tests, which were called theme tests, which worked on a child's ability to take all the little bits from the bigger picture of the units that were being studied and to be able to tie them together. So for example, we would, how could you tie in a study of an ancient civilization to studying electromagnetism? And they would be asked very thought-provoking questions in order to spark their critical thinking skills. So arguably, any child learns better when there's less standardized testing because there's less stress and there is less panic when it comes to making sure that you've covered all the necessary topics for it. And also, once you've completed the test, that anxious waiting to get your mark back and perhaps even that unhealthy comparison with the peers. The third myth I'd like to dispel today is that students who attend a Montessori school lack basic math skills. And I'm particularly referring here to the memorization and quick fact knowledge of the times tables, basic addition and subtraction facts, as well as division. This is a big concern because quite often that is a large focus for parents. And yes, those basic math skills are foundational in the sense that they are necessary in order to complete higher level math problems. However, as a parent, it's also easy to misunderstand the way in which they are taught. There are lots of materials and games and activities that are done in a Montessori preschool and elementary classroom to set up a child for success with the memorization of basic math facts. An example of some ways that basic math facts are practiced in elementary classrooms are things like simply having dominoes, where a child will pick a few, and it can be addition, subtraction, even multiplication. Then they would have to record all of their answers. The same result can easily be achieved with cards. So you could flip over two and either add or subtract them together. However, again, there is none of that standardized rote practice that you might see in a public or traditional kind of school, where a child might have to sit down once a week along with the rest of their class and complete a times table sheet or practice their addition facts to 20 every single day, that kind of thing. In fact, the Montessori math materials with any of the beads or any of the number tiles do reinforce that practice. And here is an example of a material that is found generally in the elementary years, specifically to calculate and record all the multiples of a specific number. So this example is 3. And my teacher trainer, although you can't hear her, was just saying back there how the first part of the presentation is to point out that 100 is not divisible by 3. The visual components of those materials do enhance the memorization of them, because there is now color and size attributed to different values. And yes, quite a few students do tend to not memorize their multiplication tables up to 12 by the end of elementary. But I find that pretty common throughout other public schools and students from public schools that I have tutored or taught privately as well. So I think it just more depends on the student and how motivated they are by math and how much they enjoy math, and how much the parents at home support a healthy learning of math. The fourth myth I'd like to dispel today is that children who attend a Montessori preschool or school in general become outliers if they transition to a public school. And what I mean by outliers is that they kind of have a culture shell shock and end up not necessarily doing as well in a larger public school setting. A lot of kids do choose to leave Montessori schools, especially in the middle school or high school years, simply because they are, for example, very into a sport. For example, in the city that I'm in, each high school kind of has a sport academy, where if you're a student who participates in the sport academy, your whole academic schedule revolves around this sport schedule. So that's very tempting for a lot of kids who maybe want to prioritize their sports over their academics in later years. There are various other reasons why kids transition out of Montessori schools, but remember that a primary goal of Montessori education is to give the child tools to become an independent, self-sufficient person as they grow. And so I think perhaps where this myth stems from is if a child becomes overwhelmed by the sheer number increase of students around them, perhaps they are now moving to a school with multiple different buildings that they have to navigate around. That can be very overwhelming for sure if you've come from a rather more intimate Montessori school setting with smaller class sizes and multi-age groups as well. I can understand how that could be overwhelming. At that point, it is up to the family to band together and to support this child in getting over that initial hump of transition, because once that transition happens, then the child will see success no matter where they are. And it's all about your outlook on any transition. And I think it's very easy for these myths to come about from, say, perhaps one family that has a negative experience with transitioning a kid from Montessori to a public school, and then kind of spreads malicious talk or frustrated talk as well. So I dispel this myth simply because it is, I think, very dependent on how the family unit supports the child as a whole through whatever transition the child is beginning, whether it is going from a Montessori school to a public school or perhaps even vice versa. The final myth I would like to dispel today for you is the myth that if your child doesn't have homework, they are not going to be learning effectively. And this is a massive topic. It's actually a large reason why families love Montessori. And so this myth kind of stems from that traditional line of thinking where parents are used to the culture of having to do homework from either when they are in school or if they have an older child or some other child that doesn't attend a Montessori school that is bringing home homework. And here I'm specifically talking about the elementary years because in the middle school years, that is when you start to introduce small bits of homework. Maria Montessori very much believed that while a child was attending school or preschool, it was like their work. And so just like when you come home from your work and you are finished your job for the day, so should a child be when they come home from school. And so for this reason, a child should feel satisfied and complete and tired enough from the work that they've done at school that there should be no need for homework at home. And indeed, that philosophy is carried out quite effectively in Montessori schools today. The idea too is that if you are bringing home homework as a student from school every day, what it really is saying is that there somehow isn't enough time during the day for this work to be completed, and so it needs to be completed at home. The structure of a day in a Montessori elementary or preschool classroom is such that there are those long uninterrupted periods of work where a task can be started and completed in an entire cycle. This disbands any reason to bring homework home because everything has already been completed at school. Perhaps the only homework or support at home that your Montessori teacher might ask for you to do is to help your child practice reading. And if you'd like more tips on how to support reading at home, I just made a video about that, which I will link down below for you. And trust me, your child is learning a lot on a school day. There's a lot of stimulation. There's a lot of topics covered in depth. There's a lot of things that go on a school day. And if you are a parent of a child who attends a Montessori school and you would like a better idea of what goes on in a typical day or even a morning, I would encourage you to email the school principal or to your child's teacher and see if you can come in for an observation period. Although on second thought, in today's climate, I'm not sure if that would be allowed, but perhaps there is a classroom door with a one-way window or some sort of wall that has a space that you can be physically distanced and still observe what's happening. Once you have a greater understanding of what goes on in a typical elementary school day, this might ease that twinge of anxiety a little bit more about that feeling of, well, if they're not bringing work home, then they aren't working enough. And it's just simply not true. They are working lots. Your child is working lots and their brain is tired at the end of the day. They want to come home and have a snack and have some playtime, and that's it. Just as you come home from your work day, you would like to not answer any emails or have to finish some report or do any grading. And unless you're a teacher, then you do those things all the time. Anyway, those are my 5 Montessori classroom myths. I hope that you have learned something from today. Thank you so much for watching, and in the meantime, stay safe, stay sane, and I'll catch you next time.